Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about magic in general. We're gonna be taking stock of what's going on, seeing what's happening overall in magic, and spoiler alert, it's not very good. It's pretty bad. So let's get into it. Obviously, big thing about magic uh, is we've been getting a lot of stuff that's a little too pushed, a little too far. Things are too undercosted, got a little too many abilities overpowered or whatnot. So yeah, that's not make it's not good, right? In a word, it's not good. You know, it's a little strange. We see wizards making a lot of the same mistakes they've made in the past, dipping into mechanics that are completely busted, doing things that they know aren't going to work, but doing them anyways for some reason. It doesn't make any sense. And you know, R&D hasn't been doing a very good job of balancing any formats, including the ones that are supposed to matter, like say limited or standard, but they can't even do that. So exactly what are they balancing around? It's not like, you know, previously they weren't able to do it. Obviously they did for the most part, but there is something though. There obviously the biggest thing is a new philosophy that they've adopted. And that would be this fire thing. So this is just, I don't know if you guys have ever worked in a large corporation before, but this is the same kind of bullshit that they like. It's just these retarded fucking boomer like slogans that they think are smart or funny or just it, it, it's dumb. So we have this thing called fire, and it's this sort of guiding principle that play design use, starting with like War with the Spark, and it's, you know, magic should be fun, inviting, replayable, and exciting. Have they hit any of these metrics? I'm pretty sure every busted card they printed has been a failure. In fact, I think they failed in every format pretty much for the last year. And it's just like, there's obviously no end in sight. I'm a little worried about the next core set because it's Teferi based. I'm like, the last couple Teferi cards have been a little obnoxious. So are we going to see something of that level? Teferi is one of my favorite characters. I don't want to hate Teferi. I love Teferi. Anyways, so apparently even Throne of Eldraine is the right power level, but Oko was just a bit too far. You know, nothing about Field of the Dead being insane or Once Upon a Time or whatever, you know, Veil of Summer, this kind of stuff, but hey, whatever, you know. I guess those cards are problems too. We had to eventually ban them, but I mean, it's just there's a huge a disconnect. This feels just like, you know, corporate overreach, like print really busted cards so people will have to buy them kind of thing. Which, I mean, sounds stupid, but if it seems like that's the direction we're going. And of course, this is the name of the article. Play design lessons learned. Yeah, well, I guess we'll have to see if that's true. We'll have to see if that's true. All right, so let's get on to some of the annoying cards, annoying problems. I got a beer with me. I got some Guinness, so that's always good. Drink a little bit of Guinness. You pretty much need to drink to play Magic these days, whether in Commander, which is just because you're having a good time, or whether you're playing any constructed format because it's fucking shit. So I'm drinking some Guinness. That's great. This is good stuff. Mm, that's a good stout. All right. So we got these cards that are just keyword soup. They just do a million things. I mean, does anyone actually know off the top of their head all the abilities that Questing Beast has? For example, like uh, say if you attacked with like a Noble Hierarch with a Questing Beast in play, and they block with the true name Nemesis. Did you know that the true name Nemesis will trade with the Noble Hierarch? It's, it's because creature damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. It's not just Questing Beast itself. It's a global buff for all of your dudes. Does anyone know that? That it would all, it's like, I mean, this is just a little bit unintuitive, and it obviously just does so many things. It's ridiculous. Now, I'll take any chance. I mean, the silver lining around Questing Beast is it shits on True Name, like one of the dumbest cards they've ever printed, was just fucking stupid. But Questing Beast, that doesn't really give Questing Beast much of a pass, other than it's not a super overpowered card. It's rather fair, but still too much. Uro has less words on it, but it just gains life, draws cards, and recurs itself. Like I mean, you can't even answer this guy on curve, or just in general, like without just losing like cards or whatever. I mean, this thing is just ridiculous. These cards just do too much. They have too many words. Like it's just ridiculous. I mean, how can you even look at these things? I mean, Kroxa would be here too. I mean, it's not like Kroxa is like horrendous. I mean, this card's just worse than like drawing a card typically, and then like its other ability, you know, they don't always lose the life or whatever. So it's a little less good than Uro overall, and then just the red-black color combination, like the Rakdos style decks have never been like really overpowered or overrepresented in any format ever, really. I mean, when was the last time you can think of like a super busted like black-red deck or something? Like, these don't really exist. But yeah, Uro's dumb. Just nope. Although I like the card, I think it's cool. I like the idea of it, but the way it affects the game obviously is pretty toxic. And this is, of course, a very related point, is that these cards, they just do too much. They do too much for the cost. I mean, Oko, for example, it's not only does it just have too much loyalty for only 3 mana, but it gains you life, creates extra artifact permanents, which are easily abusable by certain artifact decks. It invalidates creatures or artifacts in play, so it has a sort of Thoughtseize style effects. It creates really repeatable, boring game states, and even has like a fucking mind control effect. So if they try and, you know, play a big thing, you can switch it with a food token. Like, this is just, it's too much. This is obviously too much. Like, they didn't even play test this card. Like, I mean, how... It's like players even figured it out pretty quickly once they figured out what food is, but they didn't know. I mean, it's just there's no confidence. I mean, I don't understand how anyone has any confidence left. I mean, I am extremely conservative in my views regarding bannings and everything else, and criticism of Wizards of the Coast. I'm not super upset that, you know, Smuggler's Copter was pushed. You know, I mean, it's just like, yeah, it's a new card type kind of thing, or subtype or whatever, and they wanted to make it good, and the hill is too high, no big deal, this happens, you know? Or Jace, which, you know, if you played your Jace decks against Jund or whatever, you'd be like, well, this is fine, this card's not even that good. You just get shit on by Bloodbraid, or they just kill it with Putrid Leech or something. Like, I mean, whatever, right? At least that's understandable, but obviously that didn't really turn out super well. I mean, there's always going to be mistakes. I mean, Skullclamp, again, that's an enormous mistake, but that's at least even more understandable than something like Oko, where it's like they've gotten bitten by like planeswalkers that just are too cheap, do too much, or just even just too centralizing. You know, certain 3-mana walkers like the Liliana of the Veil. You know, and that's an issue. And they just don't. They push too hard on these cards, and why? Well, let's go over that. I've talked about this in the past, but let's do it again. Value engines. Back in the day, it used to be hard. Planeswalkers, all they require is that you can cast the fucking things and you can get some value out of them. A lot of them will have like a way to defend themselves, like Jace's Jace Mind Sculptor's minus, I think it's -1 is to unsummon. Obviously, Oko makes elks, turns your opponent's bigger things into smaller elks. Obviously, all sorts of stuff. Pretty much all planeswalkers have a way to defend themselves. Karn's -2. You can wish oftentimes for Ensnaring Bridge to stop your opponent from attacking, or you can wish for Mycosynth Lattice to stop them from playing Magic. Either or. So yeah, but back in the day, this wasn't always the thing. Planeswalkers only required the mana to cast them, and maybe not even to protect them, because sometimes, say Liliana circa Deathrite Shaman, where you play your turn 2 Liliana, or Oko off Gilded Goose. These turn 2 planeswalkers can just generate an insurmountable amount of card advantage or board advantage and just do too much, and just getting that extra turn with your planeswalker in play where you're not pressured is just absolutely insane. And then of course, everyone knows this now because they played with these cards for a while, but it wasn't always this way. We had value engines, but they had costs. They had real deck building costs and gameplay costs. Survival of the fittest. You need to build your deck with a bunch of creatures, I think around 25 plus, and you need to have a lot of green mana producing lands. Typically, if say you're playing like in Legacy or something, if you're playing like ATS, Angry Tradewind Survival, or just any other old survival deck before it was banned, you only played green mana producing dual lands and then some forests, basic forests or whatever, and very, very rarely do you ever play any other basic lands, because obviously survival is very green mana heavy and you have to activate it a couple times to really get your engine going, to get your squee and then discard the squee to get another thing and then to discard the Genesis and so on and so forth. And then of course you still need green mana to cast a lot of those creatures too, so there's a little bit of cost, right? It does require something. Goblin Ringleader requires you to play a bunch of goblins, again approximately 30. Necropotence, okay? This one requires you obviously to play a very heavy black deck, as well as it actually had an actual cost, to draw the cards you need to pay life, which does create an interesting tension in game a lot of the time. Less so if you're playing like Storm, but still, the point still stands. I'm not going to say Necro is the best design card of all time, but A, it's iconic, B, has great art, and it's so fun to play with. And obviously it's super busted, but this is literally 2 years after the game came out. It's a little understandable. And of course, we have land tax. Again, this requires you to play a bunch of basic lands, which is, again, not very hard, but it has certain deck building requirements. If you want to get the most out of it, you gotta play Scroll Rack 2. And then obviously multiple copies of land tax aren't that great. To activate it, you need to have less lands than your opponent, so that's a big, huge tempo loss. So you need to play things like Mox Diamond, but that does go well with land tax itself. So, it does open up deck building constraints, but it makes these decks interesting, right? And I think more or less these are really where you want to be. Obviously, survival, a little too good, Necro, a lot too good, but I think land tax and Goblin Ringleader are pretty much where you want to be, at least in a lot of Eternal formats. So, these made decks interesting, whereas a lot of the recent cards printed are just I can cast it, I'll play it, and then I just have it in play a bunch, and then I just win. That's just not interesting, it's dumb, it's stupid, it creates boring games of Magic, it's fucking face roll. It's not interesting deck building to play Oko in your deck. It doesn't create interesting game states. Just horrible cards, right? Maybe not even bannable, but they're just horrible. They're just absolutely miserable to play against. Or boring. Or both. And this, again, is also part of a larger trend. It's not just the ramping up of power level over the last year. And obviously they haven't been, last couple years, haven't been very good with regards to, balancing. Some of that, again, was due to Kaladesh, and artifact blocks tend to be busted, especially with the introduction of new types. So Mirrodin had equipment, of course, caused issues, Skullclamp, and then later Mutate and the next expansion and Betrayers. And then of course we had, Smuggler's Copter, the vehicle thing. Didn't, a little busted. Some of them were very good, very strong, pretty fun, interesting cards. Copter just did a little bit too much in standard, but didn't really make waves anywhere else. So, I mean, whatever. And that's okay. That's fine. Not a big deal. But the balancing has just been bad, really bad with energy. And then having to ban, like, the dinosaur from Ixalan, the Menace dinosaur. Man, that thing is sweet. I can't remember its name. Rampaging Ferocidon. Yeah, rampaged all over my balls. But the biggest thing is, again, this has been going on, and I'll always use counterspells, the best sort of emblematic representation of WotC deliberately choosing to power down the answers that are available, and this is typically overall. I mean, obviously sometimes, like they reprinted Terminate in like an Alara block, and then also had like Path to Exile also during Alara block, and some other things. Mystical Dispute's a pretty good counterspell. In some formats they don't have like actual good counter magic, but Dispute's actually pretty solid. Pretty much an upgrade on Gainsay, more or less. And then you have things like Fatal Push, which is probably really the best one, one of the best removal spells printed in forever. That was actually really fair and balanced. Well, hell, most removal is fair and balanced. These reactive cards tend to be, because it's not like you can play them and get ahead. You need your opponent to have a certain thing to make them, because creature removal doesn't do anything if your opponent doesn't have any creatures, right? They're dead cards. So pretty much by design, reactive cards are very, very hard to be overpowered. I mean, you need to look like Mana Drain or something like Mental Misstep, which give you too many resources or cost nothing or whatever. You have to really, really push the bar on reactive cards for them to really be unhealthy. Typically, they're not going to do that. Not the way that busted cards like, say, Urza Lord High Artificer is, that, basically got Mox Opal banned, where it wasn't really doing anything that busted. I mean, obviously it's a free Mox, but the decks that we're in weren't really insane, right? Like Scales, Affinity, Lantern, at least in Modern. Oh man, I'm talking so much. I need another drink. I'm just getting so excited. All right. So WotC has deliberately chosen, especially in the last year, it's been obviously totally insane with threats versus answers. They're just, I mean, this is basically the focus group gone wrong kind of thing, because what ends up happening is like, oh, Timmy doesn't like his, 10 mana 10/10 being counterspelled, so we need to print cancel and like garbage 3 mana counters and stuff. Like, if we're printing like Absorb and Undermine, those are good 3 mana counterspells in standard. I don't have a problem with them. Those are good. Any interesting 3 mana counterspell, something tacked on, is good. Obviously, I think obviously counterspell is a little above. Probably, I think, like, people have always said, like, it's not, too good at 2 mana, 3 mana it's just really weak. So it should be like 2.5 mana, right? Like the unhinged mechanic. We had half mana. That should actually be in the new unset, if they make one. Anyways, I feel it's better to have reactive cards that overshoot a little bit. And again, part of Counterspell's problems was a lot of the cards that were printed with it. So if you remember, the last blocks that Counterspell was in was really Invasion Odyssey or whatever, that standard type 2. Do you remember what cards were surrounding Counterspell? So we had Cunning Wish, Factor Fiction, Psychotog, tons of really good removal like Smother, Chainer's Edict, Duress. Not only just Counterspell, we had Memory Lapse, Circular Logic. I mean, just insane. Like Upheaval. How is Upheaval even in a card? Like, it's just, Upheaval is totally absurd. Like, I mean, this thing is, it's like, oh, well, blue decks might have problems with cards in play. Well, shit, might as well just make them deal with all that stuff. Let's just cast Upheaval. Upheaval, this is fair, right? Yeah, and then you just dump a Tog into play. Tog at least was a little understandable because it looked kind of bad, but I can see at least them, you know, Tog wasn't made to be busted. It just turned out to be busted because its abilities were synergistic with each other, and there was such insane amounts of card draw. You know, stuff like the deep analysis, like I said, factor fiction, and so forth. And that was really the last time that like Blue had like really a big iron grip on like the format. I mean, you couldn't play other decks that weren't Tog really. There was I mean, you know, Fairies was really good. I don't think Fairies was quite that oppressive off the top of my head. I don't quite remember. That was not a standard I played a ton in, but the point still stands is like, I think some of these things get conflated. Like, I mean, I think you could kind of say that that was probably the only time that, like, say, reactive cards or these control decks that countered everything you did and then killed you or whatever were too good, you know. But that, again, wasn't just really a function of Counterspell, but the interaction, the nexus between all of these different cards. And then some things that just shouldn't have been printed, like Upheaval, obviously, was a huge mistake. The Factor Fiction, one of the most busted blue cards for the longest time. I mean, still obviously very good, but the game's sort of sped up and been not about card advantage, especially when there aren't cards to really like work with Factor Fiction, like Counterspell, that slows the game down, answer one for one, refill with off, things like that. And then Tog itself was, I mean, obviously a total fluke. I mean, I don't, it was just part of a cycle of gag cards, right? The Togs, right? I mean, original Tog would actually go on to be a pretty ridiculous card in the Affinity decks, not too many years later, just a couple. But they were just silly, right? I don't think they ever tested them or even thought about them. Maybe they're like, oh, this Tog thing can discard cards to get them into your graveyard or something, right? But yeah, this thing, you know, where the joke was it would probably be worse if it was a 3-mana 4/5 because you just couldn't one-shot someone with it. Anyways, so what I mean to say is Counterspell's dominance was kind of, again, I think Wizards is sort of still scarred from that, combined with, like I said, this sort of focus group, like new player, like, oh, I can't believe you Doombladed my guy. Oh, I can't believe you countered my guy. It was horrible. I mean, you know, again, you don't balance games at the competitive level around shitters, right? You don't, you know, you're not gonna go up to every mouth breather and be like, oh, you don't like this? Okay, well, we'll take Stone Rain out. It's just stupid. It's totally stupid. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And yeah, obviously Counterspell is again a little bit too powerful. It's definitely more of like a lightning bolt kind of thing, but it doesn't really make a ton of sense because lightning bolt is a more dangerous card than Counterspell is, and I think it has more egregious effects on deck building and stuff. Since it can just kill you, and the kind of decks it goes in can be very non-interactive, especially like say you just get bolt and you know you die from where you think you're kind of okay and stabilized. I think that would be a greater issue, but I mean they still reprinted bolt and still Counterspell sees nothing. I mean just the it's if we reprint Counterspell then you wouldn't play stuff like Logic Knot, a fucking garbage card. Like that's just too much. Logic Knot, yeah, let's play that. Counterspell, too good. Urza, Hogak, yeah, that's what we're aiming for. You fucking idiots. Need a fucking drink. So again, this is just part of the powering down answers. And then I'm not asking for force and plow. Standard doesn't need that, and I don't think it's particularly good for the game. But maybe on a slightly related note, maybe these cards might actually eventually start to be extremely important for Modern. Not just Force of Negation and Path to Exile, but the original ones. How many more years are we going to see before, Modern is only just a couple years younger than Legacy. I mean, Modern started in 2003, right? Well, not the actual format, but it starts in Mirrodin block and then goes till today, 17 years. It's an extremely long time. That's almost as well. Let's see, Legacy at that time, say 2003, 2004. You had 11. It was like 11 years old at that point. So, I mean, how much more ridiculous are we going to get before we're like, okay, maybe we need Wasteland, Force of Will, and Swords in Modern to really check a lot of this stupid bullshit we keep printing and just to sort of keep things in check in general. Not just now, but in the future. And I can see that at some point. I would say a lot of times, like, I mean, obviously there's always going to be a big difference between Legacy and Modern, and I would usually be somewhat reticent of making them more similar or homogenized, but I think it makes more sense for the health of Modern if eventually they probably get a lot of these tools. I mean, they should at least have stuff like Counterspell and Dust Bowl and Vindicate and Pernicious Deed. These are all very fair cards, wouldn't be take over the format at all, and they really can't because reactive cards typically don't do that. Again, obvious exceptions like Mana Drain and Mental Misstep. I mean, these are, this is sort of like a more of a, but those are the exceptions, not the rule, not the rule. So that's an issue, but I think I've gone on a little bit too long about this. So let's move on. Okay, so WotC seems to like to go back to the same well of bad ideas over and over again and just do too much. I mean, just again, why do we need to see more Delve cards? Like Delve, I think is fine depending on what it's on. Like it's fine on Gurmag Angler, it's very good, but it's not on something like Hogak where you can cast it from your graveyard and it costs nothing, and it's just, I mean, just an absurd card where it can just keep coming back. I mean, and just, it's so busted. It's just totally ridiculous. Like these graveyard cards, they keep going back to the graveyard as a resource and pushing them way too hard. And it shocks me every time we keep getting more busted graveyard stuff. It's like, how fucking many times do you need to keep doing the same retarded thing and screwing up before you realize that maybe you should stop doing it? I don't know. And same thing with Once Upon a Time. It's not only is it a free spell, but it's card filtering. I mean, this thing is basically a better Impulse. So, I mean, they won't even print Impulse. They'll print sorcery speed versions, but those are blue. Blue can't be good ever because that would just be illegal. But green can do everything, right? It just does whatever. And same thing in Ikoria. There's still green cards that just do everything. It's like a green fucking Dark Banishing or whatever, 3-mana kill spell. It's just stupid. So yeah, they really just need to stop doing. I mean, free spells can be fine and even good if they're reactive. I mean, no one thinks. I mean, obviously, Force Will's certainly the strongest one, but I mean, Daze too, of course. But these have good effects, I think, for the most part, on the game, where they slow the game down and let you actually play Magic. And I mean, things like Pyrokinesis, Contagion, any of the new forces are good. Force of Vigor, Force of Despair, and so on. Like these are good cards. And it's fine that they're free. Like, it's good to have stuff like Mind Break Trap and Tormod's Crypt. Tormod's Crypt being one of the original sort of hate cards. So, yeah, this free stuff for, card filtering. It's like, Ponder and Preordain are banned in Modern, but like, then they're like, what about this Once Upon a Time thing? Like, do you even think about what you're doing? Like, why would you not play this card in every single fucking green deck in Standard? Is that really where you want to be? Is that interesting? That's not interesting deck building. I mean, that kind of like card selection is just too much. I mean, God forbid, there's ever like a combo deck, then they can run it. And it's not hard to splash green, especially in this Standard format. Shit. Bad ideas. They keep revisiting the same bad ideas You keep printing cards that just don't make a lot of sense. So why would you print Plague Engineer? Do you really just want to be like, yeah, I really need to punish these like creature decks that get on board and have a lot of the same creature type, whether they're literal tribal decks like goblins or elves, or just something like Death and Taxes or whatever that has a lot of like humans. Like these aren't interesting. There's like zero deck building costs. They're so brutally effective. I mean, it's just it doesn't make any sense. Like, are you? I mean, there used to be like an actual cost to play Engineer Plague, right? Because it was an enchantment, didn't win you the game, it could have been dead, it takes up sideboard space, etc., etc. You can't play it main deck. It doesn't trade with their, 6/6 or 5/5 or whatever, their Gurmag Angler. But it's just no cost. There's no cost for a lot of these things, and they're punishing all the wrong things. It's stupid. Okay. And so this sort of goes along with the kind of keyword soup stuff is the mutate and just the increasing complexity. I think Adventure was a little confusing with some of the stuff going on behind the scenes, like what's the converted mana cost of the card, like when is it an instant, when is it a creature, and things like that. I think that was a little confusing, but they played pretty easily, and I think they were more or less intuitive. But Mutate just like takes it to another level. Like what happens? Do you know what happens? Is it intuitive? What happens when you mutate onto a planeswalker? What happens when you mutate onto a token? Put it on the top, put it on the bottom. What happens when you Snapdax, say, is your commander, you mutate him onto something, onto 2 or 3 other creatures already mutated, and then it gets bounced. They bounce it and it goes back to your command zone, whatever that new card was. Leadership Vacuum? So it goes to your command zone. And so the problem is everything else it's attached to is also your commander, so it goes to the command zone. But you can only cast your commander because they become unattached and unmutated when they're the command zone. So it's like everything, it's just, is that obvious? Is that intuitive? Wouldn't you assume they go to the graveyard? So all of these things just really creates like, it's just a huge, huge mess. Like, I think Mutate's cool. I like the idea of it, but like the whole rules with it is just totally like unintuitive, extremely complex. One of the most complex mechanics I've seen since like banding or something. I mean, just or phasing. Even phasing is probably more grokkable than this. Like it's just absolute. I think it's flavorful. I think it's a win there. I think it works cool. I think it looks cool. I like the idea of making huge things, but I feel like it's not going to play out very well just because the card disadvantage of stuff like getting mutated and then them just like answering it, like make a big stack and then just, they plow it and you feel like a dummy. So I don't know. But yeah, it's a little too confusing and I'm not a huge, I love, I've been playing forever, but I'm a little wary of things like this that are like way, way too high up in the complexity because it's not easily understandable for me. And I actually am pretty familiar with the rules. I've been playing for like 20 years. And if I can't understand it, I mean, how is the average Magic player going to do it? Like they started, say, in Dominaria. They look at this thing and think it works one way, it doesn't. And then, like, I remember when I was first starting, when people tried to tell me like all these weird corner case rules things, I'm like, this is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. This is dumb. You're an idiot, you know? And it's like, it really turned me off. I was really upset because it's like, this doesn't make any sense. You're just bullshitting me. You're trying to cheat. And that's how this mutate thing feels. It's like, it's just so weird and I don't like it. I mean, I do like it, but I also don't like it. So, and that brings me to Companion. So back in the day, a really long time ago, they actually had a kind of like a format called Vanguard. And it was basically kind of like a pseudo commander thing where you could have these Vanguard cards. They'd modify your starting life total and hand size, and they would have certain effects. Well, unfortunately, a lot of these cards were just insanely busted. Karn would let you have an additional card, and then also start with +6 life, and then basically just be March of the Machines. So like all of your stuff would just be like creatures, and so you'd have, you know, like your 3 dynamos and Mishra's helixes be able to beat down and also lock them out of the game, and then beat them down, you know, once they're whatever dead or something. Tangle wires, like all this crap. So basically, just be like the effect of Karn's Silver Golem, which would make sense why Karn is the one doing it. But anyways, Raphalos would be like, oh, it's a little more balanced. You have -2 cards in your hand, and then starting life is +4. But it's whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card. I mean, so it's a one-sided fecundity. Okay. I mean, just these things were just, it was completely stupid. Like the decks were super busted. Like obviously some were just better than others, and it wasn't really like very, I mean, how was Karn like +1 card +6 starting life? I mean, it just, I mean, yeah, like, oh yeah, artifact decks need a lot of help. They're not busted enough, right? Shit. Um, this brings me to Companion. Companion is very similar to that, but it's also probably more similar to Commander in a lot of ways. You have to build your deck around it, and in this case, you literally have to build your deck around it. Otherwise, you can't use it as a companion, but you can still play it in your deck. So Lurrus requires you to, I mean, this is a very steep cost. You can't play permanents with convert mana costs. 2 or less. So you can only play stuff 2 or less, but anything more than that, but only for permanents. So like in most formats, your mana curve gets restricted, or I should say compacted. So the faster formats tend to play less and less expensive cards. And it's not even that though. Like it's not like, oh, I can't play Lurrus and Grixis Delver because it's only permanents. So like you're missing out on a couple cards in Delver decks, say like True Name or Brazen Borrower or Oko, like a couple of different cards you only play as a couple copies of each. But for the benefit of having an 8th card in your hand, that's basically a super draw engine. So you can, you know, replay your Delvers or Dreadhorde Arcanists, or in something like the Storm decks, you can of course replay something like LED. This thing is castable from LED. It's just, I mean, it's kind of insane. Think about, you know, you starting on 8 cards versus your opponent on 7, but it's better than that because it's a creature that you always has access to that has some sort of effect. So, I mean, even just like a vanilla card like Gigantha is kind of insane. Garuda and Zerda are slightly different because they're explicitly combo cards. I mean, there are decks to play them in Legacy, but it's not even just Legacy. These things are all over the place. There's only been a couple days since the set came out online, and you have things like Lutri, which requires you to play base singleton, you know, singleton cards. Pretty easy to enable for Vintage because everything is already mostly singleton, so it's not like a huge deal. Zerda combos with, you know, stuff like Grim Monolith. Garuda combos with filling your deck with clones. I mean, it's just really silly. Like none of these things really have deck building costs, at least not like that, you know, at least not deck building costs that are that, you know, extreme in older formats, because you just have more options. You already have decks, for example, that don't play 1-cast spells. They're, you know, ancient tomb based decks. And the big thing about a lot of these ancient tomb based decks was that they were somewhat inconsistent, but say having something like Garuda in your sideboard ready to play really reduces that. Although most tomb-based decks are like prison-esque Garuda decks or anything but. You know, I mean, sometimes they play defense grid and stuff too, you know. But it's, I mean, there's not really deck building costs, and decks that can't play these cards because the cost would be too big for them are just behind the curve. Like they're just going to be like 7 cards versus 8 cards. God forbid if you mulligan. How do you ever win that game? Even just answering these cards is just like answering a Lurrus after they've already cracked like a bauble from the yard. So they're up like 2, 3 cards already. And then if it just sits around, it's like the game just, you can't win it at all, right? Like it's just totally insane, totally changes the way you play. Even if you don't play them, you have to save like a bolt or a plow or something for said card, or like a, you know, a REB for Garuda or something. I mean, they do too much. They ask too little of you. Even just like if it was just a vanilla card, it's just too much. You know, just I don't think we should be making Constructed like Commander. They should be different formats. They should feel very, very different. I don't want them to feel the same because they, you know, one's casual, one's competitive. There's a lot of really ridiculous cards in Commander and play patterns because sometimes your Commander is a combo piece and you always have access to them, and that kind of thing is just, it's just totally insane. And this effect is nuts. And is all of these decks that were all over the top 8 and top 32 of these online challenges. It would have been even worse, but Garuda was banned because of the way it's templated. Its interaction was screwed up with Leyline, and Leyline doesn't actually affect it, but it was affecting it, making it not doing anything, so they temporarily banned it before they fix it. I mean, the thing just needs to be banned in general because it's just totally nuts. Like, all of these cards are ridiculous, and having them basically have to be played because there's no real downside, because even just having a vanilla big dumb thing in your sideboard to cast after a war of attrition is insane. It's totally nuts. And yeah, so I mean, they've tested these kind of mechanics before. In Tempest, they tested a mechanic like this, and it was obviously too insane. They actually had a Hearthstone deck, or decks, with cards like Gen Greymane, where they're like, oh, you need to build your deck with odd or even costs, and that was just totally insane. They had to rotate those cards early. Um, so they were just, this reduces the amount of variance. All the games play the same, which is again a big problem with a lot of the cards they've been printing that were too good. They make the games all play the same. These are way too overpowered, and a lot of the decks that can play these are already very good decks, and they don't really lose a lot in playing them. And if other decks can't play their own companion or whatever, then they're already pretty far behind. And that, my friends, is not very good. Nope. So, and this is every format. Every format's been basically infiltrated and taken over by companions. So, that's not good. Pretty bad. So, yeah. I guess I'm not upset. Not really. I mean, it just is what it is, right? So, that's it. I don't know where we go from here. I don't think it gets any better. I think it was right. I was wondering if this constant bannings and overpowered cards is just going to be the new normal, and it looks like that's the case. So, yeah, I thought Ikoria, it sounded like when they were talking about it before they started doing the spoilers, I'm like, oh, they're gonna have new ways to build your decks, and they'll be interesting. Maybe a new kind of archetype, you know, instead of like aggro combo control, maybe they'll have these kind of monster decks or something or whatever. I didn't know I was wishing on a monkey's paw, otherwise I wouldn't have said anything. So yeah, not good, not good. But I don't know. I guess I don't know what else to say. It's pretty unfortunate. This is an all hands on deck moment. This is the worst situation the game has been in since Urza's block. This is worse than the Cobblade fiasco. All they had to do was just ban a couple cards. Things went back to normal. This is worse than Mirrodin. I mean, we have cards that are just as busted than a lot of things they printed in Mirrodin. But that, again, was, you know, fixed. They banned it. whatever. They banned them in pretty much all formats pretty quickly enough. But this is really going to affect the health of the game if we're just making new busted cards and thinking, oh, if they're too strong, we'll ban them. I mean, what's the purpose of play design if they can't even balance the cards for standard or draft? Companions in draft are not fun. They're a little ridiculous. God forbid if your opponent mulligans. Like, again, how do they win that game? Just being down so many cards is brutal. I mean, think about, like I said, the situation with like casting Ancestral Recall and Vintage. Only puts you up 2 cards, but oftentimes people play like Misdirection and things like that. I mean, like being up a couple cards just sort of naturally and very easily is just a way to easily seal a game. And a lot of the companions do it, a lot of the new cards do it. These ridiculous value engine planeswalkers or other cards that do too much and ask for too little from you. And that's really bad. It's not a good direction for the game to go in. Where everyone's just playing these big stupid haymakers, and we can't really do anything about them because that's just like answers are bad, but Uro is good. So that's it. That's it. So I hope you guys are staying safe, staying healthy, all that good stuff. And thank you for listening to this whole thing. So yeah. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.